Hello and welcome back to Beaters, Drivers, and Survivors. And today we're going to be removing the old air shocks that are on my 61 Skylark and replacing them with something a bit more traditional. At the end of our last video, you could see that the weather actually got better and we were able to take the 61 Buick for a drive for the first time in over 18 years, and it was fantastic. The one thing I did notice though right away is the car has air shocks on the back of it because the previous owner had wheels that stuck out a little bit. The offset I think was bad, but he wanted something wider on there for a certain look. Nothing against what the previous owner was doing, but we're trying to go our own direction with this car. So no need for the air shocks on the back. I don't want this thing sitting up in the back like a cockroach or whatever. So I wanted to put something on more traditional as far as a shock. I did actually have more difficulty finding shocks for this than I thought I would. Twice I got a pair of shocks that were incorrect for the car completely. They would not fit, they would not work. So what I did was dug around and I found in my old chassis manual some of the center-to-center dimensions that are required for the car. I should have looked in there at first, but I didn't even think that that information would live in there. But I do have full extension dimensions and I also have compression dimensions. And then that's what led me to the Gabriel Classic shock here, part number 82609. And when I pull this out, just eyeballing it, I think we're going to have to do some modifications to this guy as well. But before we do anything with that, let's remove the old air shocks. The car's up on jack stands and I still have the rear end supported by the jack. But safety first, so I made sure that the jack stands were safe and secure and that the jack itself was under the rear. Now we will start to remove this air shock. No air tools or power tools in this garage at the moment. Okay, so this one here is going to be a little stubborn, but we'll probably have to just pry it off. With our safety glasses on, we're going to give this thing a little pry. See if we can pry this shock off of here. Now with this shock off, we do have the bolt going through the top eye of the shock, which we'll get off next. And the reason I like to support the rear is the rear, being a four control arm rear, two lower rear control arms and two upper, the rear does have a tend to do a swivel, so when you remove the shock, it does tend to rock it down. So just for safety's sake, it's always good to support the rear. Here's a close-up of the upper mount. So what you see here is the ear. So there's an ear welded to the trunk floor up there, and then a bolt goes through that part of the ear through the shock, and then there's a nut on the back side here. So it's very tight up there to work. So it's going to be hard for me to take video of how that comes out, but when I pull the bolt out, I'll come up here again with the camera so that you can see exactly how it looks after it's removed. All right, the nut is off. So now we just have a bolt in here yet. And pull that out. There we go. There it is. And there you can see, it's like, I call them just ears, but it's really not. It's like a pocket that the shock sits in up there. Now let's compare that air shock that we pulled off to that new Gabriel to see if we have to make any modifications. I kind of think we do. Right off the bat here, I'm seeing a couple things I really do not like. I noticed that this bushing here has a much greater opening, it appears, than this one. And this bushing here you can see it has a metal collar on the inside, like a roll pin. You know, it looks like a roll pin. That's in the center of that bushing. So I will take a measurement just to make sure that it's, yeah, this isn't just something this isn't an illusion. It's definitely tighter in there with that metal bushing. Then I noticed up top here something that I don't like. This is the bolt that goes through the top for the upper mount. So this passes through those ears or that little box. And I noticed in the new shock, pretty loosey-goosey. And then I noticed the old shock, really loosey-goosey. So this definitely wasn't correct from the get-go. But I do have to look at that roll pin at the bottom, because maybe I can use that roll pin, press that out in my press, and move it to the top to take up the slack. Because it does look like, around here, this bolt fits nice and snug with minimal play in that bottom with that roll pin in there. So we might be onto something here. Next, what I'll do here is measure the diameter of the lower shock mounting stud to make sure that my new shock will fit. Okay. Oh, it's hard to see there. Looks like we're at 620 thousandth. Here's the new shock. Here's the lower mount with that suspicious roll pin in there. We're going to measure this guy. About 430 thousandth. No bueno. Now that I confirmed that this will not work in this as provided configuration, I think the first step I'm going to do is remove that roll pin and make sure that it gives me the clearance that I need to fit over that lower stud. And I'll also check to see if, because I know this upper mount here, or this upper bolt, I should say, for the upper mount, that fits right through that lower mount with that collar in there, with the roll pin. So I'm thinking I can use that roll pin then and put it in this upper end here, this upper bushing, and hopefully that fits pretty snug in there. But we'll find out as soon as I press out this roll pin. But the idea then would be I need to measure the length of the roll pin also to ensure that it fits up there within that box where the upper part of the shock actually slips in and mounts. But one thing at a time. Let's press this roll pin out and see where we're at. Always wear your safety glasses, which I have on right now. But we're going to push down. Yeah, there you can see that roll pin's already getting pushed out. Now in this case, you can see that roll pin is actually longer than the bushing. So what we're going to need to do is take this roll pin and see if it fits up within that box with the ears to mount the upper portion of the shock. My gut is telling me that this is going to be too long and we'll have to modify the roll pin. Here's that roll pin. Up there is that box. You can see that roll pin is too long. Too long to fit in there. So we're going to have to modify that. We're not modifying this, we're modifying the roll pin. But before we do that roll pin modification, I'm going to slip the shock in there and see how tight it is. The reason I want to do that is because of the bushings here. I don't want to have the roll pin that it comes out to the very end of these bushings if it fits super tight as it is right now. Because I really just want that to take up the slack of the hardware and to allow these bushings to kind of squash down a little bit. But we'll slip it up in there and see what how it's like. I'm a little concerned that it's going to be pretty tight as it is with a lot of pressure on the bushings, which is fine. But then I'm just going to make the roll pin the length of the actual shock itself on this top end. As far as the bottom end There you can see that bushing that came out right here, but that slips right back in, and that will get wider as it's clamped down. So I'm not even concerned about that whatsoever without that collar on there. We're going to verify that this bottom fits as well while we're under the car. As I assumed, this shock is extremely tight in there. So what we will do then is I will trim that collar only the length of the shock itself, or for the width of the shock at the top there. I'll only make that collar that length, just to make it fit in easier. Now down at the bottom here, that's going to be a different story. Let me see how this will work out with that bushing. So this bushing here on this stud is going to be extremely tight. And really, that's the only bushing I have. Now, I know I'll be able to make it fit, but it's going to be extremely tight. So what I'll do is lubricate this with grease that will not deteriorate this material, the rubber. And I think I will leave the eye open on the shock and make my life easier, where I will lubricate the inside of the shock or the outside of this. Also lubricate the inside, press that on, and press the entire shock eye over top of the bushing and the stud. I think that'll work out better for this particular scenario I'm dealing with here. So we know the top of this shock fit pretty tight in there, and we need some give here for these bushings to squeeze closed. So I just want to get an overall dimension here of the shock, the steel part of the shock itself. And we're at about 946 thousandth right here. So what we'll do is look at this guy, and this is that roll pin we pulled out, and this guy here is over 1 inch. So we're going to take material off, because what's going to happen is this already doesn't fit up in those ears, but we also have to make sure that the bushing can squash down to fit in the ears. So I think we're going to trim this guy down to the similar size of the body of the shock itself. So I could measure this out, but it's not super critical. So what we'll end up doing is putting a little scribe mark here. And this already has the Dykem blue on it. That my kid did this. Now we'll load this in the vise and cut it. File this off to make sure it's burr free. Okay, come here. Now for the moment of truth. We're going to make sure that the bolt still drops through. There we go. And we are small enough here that it's going to fit right through there, and I'm dropping everything. Just to make sure that this pops right in there without any issue. There we go, and what I'll do is I will press that in there, but all of this together will pass right through. I will take a socket or a drift and push that and position it that it's right in the middle. the collar's in here. I have it centered. All I did was use a very large drift to do that. Now we're going to put the shock in its top mount. Before we do that, because it is such a tight fit, I am going to put some lubricant on there just to make it fit in there a bit better, a bit easier, and also hopefully not make too much noise for me when we get the car running. After we do this, I'll show you how we handle the lower mount here, because that's a little bit tricky. All right, the top was mounted with success. The length of that roll pin was perfect. So now we have to work on the bottom one here. So this, I think, will be a little bit stubborn, because I believe these pins here came with those air shocks, because they don't look the vintage of the car. So this is going to be super tight. What I'll end up doing is putting some lubricant on that bushing as well as the pin. Hopefully that'll allow it to slide on a little bit easier here. Still going to be a tough one, but we'll be able to push that on there. And then what I'll do is I'll pull the shock down. Unfortunately, I do need to cut that cable that's holding the shock in its compressed position. I'll have to cut that to extend it, because I just can't jack the rear up high enough, because it'll lift up the car. So what I'll do is extend it, and then it is a bear, but I'll have to get underneath it and push it back up to get it into this position. That's why I'm doing this kind of backwards here, by putting the bushing on this location and then sliding the whole eye of the shock over the bushing that's already on the pin. So I'll show you that in a moment. So we have the bushing on the pin, and that bushing's lubricated on the outside. I also have the eye of the shock, this lower eye, that's lubricated as well. Now for the tough part, we're going to try to push up on this shock here and just get it started so it's sitting on that bushing. And this is not easy to do, because the shock now is extended, and I've got to try to push it up, which is always a tough thing to do. Get it squashed up there and get it just started on that bushing, which we did there. Woo! That was tough. Now we're going to try to put a washer on here and slowly push it over the bushing. Yeah, and this works pretty darn good. So we can pull this bushing in. Now we pulled it in as far as we can go, because now we're at the part of the stud that is actually a larger diameter than the threaded portion here. And that's because that's the part that the shock absorber and the bushing are actually riding on. So what we're going to do is back off that nut. And what I did was I went to the hardware store, got these washers that have the 5/8 inch opening here. The center hole's 5/8 of an inch. That will slip over, and that will also slip right over that larger diameter portion of the stud, so that it slides the rest of the shock is actually pressed completely on the bushing. So now what we'll do, I backed off the nut, removed it, because now it's time to install the lock washer. So with this assembly though, you can see I have a stack of 2 of the larger center hole hardware, which will slip on over the larger diameter of the stud. Then after that, I am installing the flat washer that is the correct diameter for the threaded portion of the stud, lock washer, and our nut. All right, now I'll tighten this up and then torque it to specification, and then I'll show you one other thing under here that I think I'm going to take care of before we put the car down. Now you realize I removed air shocks. The air shocks were there to lift the back of the car up for tire clearance. From what I remember from nearly, over 18 years ago when we bought the car and I talked to the previous owner. Now, there is another thing I found, and I don't know if the previous owner installed them or not, but they're coil spring spacers. So they're rubber spacers put between a couple of the coils. Those are in the back here. And the car sits pretty much level, as you could tell from the last video, the end of the video where I was driving the car. So I think I want to remove those spacers to see if it brings the car down just slightly in the back, because I'd like the car slightly lower in the back than the front to emulate that early 60s drag racing style. So what we're going to do is, I'll show you these here, and they're pretty dry rotted, so I think they're going to be pretty easy to remove. So right there you can see is the rubber little spacer that's in there that doesn't allow that coil to fully compress. And there's one on the other side as well. They're pretty dry rotted, so now I think I'll go up in there and pull them out. If I need to, I will take the jack out from underneath the rear to try to allow the rear to extend a bit more, which will make them easier to come out if necessary. All right, I've actually lowered the jack here, and these are so dry rotted that they fell right out. But these are what fit in between the coils and don't allow the coil to fully compress. So I'm going to reach over there then and get the other side pulled out. So here's another one. So now the next thing will be, we're going to take the jack stands out, and then we're going to lower the car and see if it dropped it down at all. Might be hard to tell in the garage, but then, hey, we have to back it out, and oh well, we need to take it for a little drive and see how it looks. Exciting. First real drive, and with the new shocks on. Now one thing is, I removed those spring spacers that didn't allow the coil to fully compress, or at least one of the coils to fully compress. And in theory, that should have lowered the car, and it would have. But the problem is, I put gas-charged shocks on this, just because that's what was readily available for the overall length and compression length that was the same as the factory. Now, the drawback to the gas-charged shocks is that it lifted the car up a little bit again. So it really sits the exact same way it did with those spring spacers in there, just because of the gas-charged shock. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do, because I would like it to sit a bit lower in the back. But really, there are other things here I want to address on the car moving forward, just to improve drivability and just get it ready that I can actually use it. But it is nice driving. It drives really, really good for sitting nearly 20 years. It's doing pretty good. It does shift good. I'll pull up on, I'm coming up onto a little highway area here that I can show you how it shifts. This is a 2-speed transmission, and it's a Buick dual path transmission. The old F85 used this as well, but it is not a Power Glide. It's a totally different, the only thing they really share is that it's a 2-speed transmission. Everything else about it is completely different. So it's a GM dual path. Once this traffic here goes away, I'll pull out here and give her some beans a little bit here to let her shift, so you can see how it shifts. Even the idle's even nice in here. I did adjust the carburetor, all of that's rebuilt, and it's working good. There's no leaks or anything like that. All right, we're gonna pull out here, then I'll get on the gas a little bit. So we're in low, so that's low gear, and high gear. That's our 1-to-1. So that's the funny thing, because
your low gear, if you compare this to like a turbo hydromatic, like a TH350 or a TH400, this low gear, like a Power Glide, is right between what your low and your second gear would be in a 3-speed automatic. So it takes a long time until it shifts into high gear, your drive, which is your 1-to-1 ratio. But the other thing that this does then is if you floor it and it kicks down, then this is all done with linkage on this car. But if I get on it now and it kicks down, that ratio now, it drops down to your low gear, which is between second gear and first gear of a turbo 350 or a turbo 400. So it drops down even further. So it drops, like, that ratio is even lower to give you a little kick in the pants. It doesn't run bad. One thing I'm noticing though is there is a drivetrain vibration that I have to address. Because if I'm cruising anywhere, I'd say around 40 mile per hour and up, there's a drive shaft. It feels like drive shaft vibration. So it could be a few things here. I'm hoping it's drive shaft related and not an axle bearing like I'm dealing with the Chevelle right now. But I think this could be a U-joint. It's either a U-joint, the sender bearing, because it's a 2-piece drive shaft, or the other thing could be that really dumb vulcanized rubber rear drive shaft. That's where the outer drive shaft slips over an inner drive shaft, and then it's vulcanized rubber that's in there to dampen them. That's in there to dampen the vibration. The problem is, when it dries up, it tends to introduce vibration rather than dampen it. So right now there isn't really much vibration. We're coming up onto the speed here. Yeah, right here, right around 45 mile per hour. We have a bit of a vibration. There you can hear it. It's even vibrating stuff in the interior. It's like a resonance. So that's something I really need to look into.
And there you have it. After nearly 2 decades of just sitting around, the 61 Buick Skylark is actually moving under its own power, stopping, steering. I'm pretty happy about how it's working. The only thing is, over that 45 mile per hour, I do notice quite a vibration coming from the driveline. So that's going to be the next thing to dig into. As I mentioned, hopefully it's only a U-joint, but it could be that sender bearing support because it's a 2-piece drive shaft, or it could be that funky rear portion of the drive shaft that has the outer shell with the inner drive shaft slipped in and then it's vulcanized. When that rubber dries out, it can cause vibration. I've seen that before in older cars. So I'm going to dig into this and see if I can pinpoint the problem, and I will bring you guys along. Thank you everybody for watching. This was a huge win just to get out and drive this thing. Put some miles on today. It was all country road driving, just my daughter and I going out on the country road zipping around, and I was also zipping around alone earlier in the day. But probably about 2 solid hours of non-stop driving with this thing, just various speeds on country roads. So it was a blast, and this thing did pretty good for its first time out. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Like and subscribe, and you're going to see this car again in the upcoming weeks. Take care.